Thank you so much,
Cool
Julian.
intro music.
Yeah, I think now that all of our nervous systems have calmed down and you brought us here into the room in such a beautiful way. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started. I know people may be trickling in, but we'll trust that whoever is here is meant to be here, and we will look forward to sharing the next little over an hour with everyone. So thank you for joining us. We are delighted to welcome you to the Anything But a Paper workshop with Dr. Julian Saporiti. I'm Megan Todd, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the Interdesert Dialogue series along with Dr. Jada Och. Jada and I both teach at ASU's Interdisciplinary Humanities and Communications Unit, and we are again grateful that you are all here with us today. Santiago Griffin Todd, who is helping us manage technology today for today's event, is on the line. So if you have any challenges that you need help resolving, please feel free to chat him. Before we begin today's workshop, we would like to acknowledge that ASU Tempe campus is situated on the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples and sovereign nations of the Salt River Valley, including the Akimal Odom and Pipash nations, whose knowledge and stewardship of the lands and waterways allow us to be here now. We would also like to recognize and honor the 23 Indigenous nations here in Arizona. And while we recognize that land acknowledgements on their own are never enough, we begin here as a first step on a path of seeding awareness, acknowledgement, and toward action and repair. Today's workshop is situated in the work that we've been doing over the last year, Jada and I, that is, as well as many other collaborators, is part of the culminating events of the Interdesert Dialogue series, which has been a year-long project that brought together artists, scholars, writers, activists, land managers, and others to inspire respect for arid environments and the people, plants, stories, animals, histories, geologies, and artistic expressions that make them up. The Interdesert Dialogues project was funded through an ASU Institute for Humanities Research seed grant with additional support from the Desert Humanities Initiative headed by Jason Bruner and the Environmental Humanities Initiative headed by Joni Adamson, as well as with support from the College of Integrative Sciences and the Arts. These individuals and programs help make today's workshop and the entire series possible, and we are grateful for their support. In today's virtual workshop, Julian will share a little bit about the way he's blended academic research and art and sound to produce public-facing works that reach far beyond the walls of the academy and engage diverse audiences. Specifically, Julian will speak to his project No No Boy and share how his doctoral work has been produced into documentary films, concerts, and critically acclaimed albums. Some of you, if you've been in class with Jada or I, may be familiar with Julian's work, as when we first became aware of it a couple of years ago, we've been sharing it widely with colleagues and students and who have found it equally as impactful. So we're so grateful that you're here with us today to engage. Now, Jada will share a brief bio before we turn it over to Julian.
Sure, thanks, Megan. In Julian Saporiti's No No Boy project, he synergizes archival research and sound recordings sampled from various historical sites and songs that prompt us to consider how individuals might find themselves and a sense of community through the past. The sonic samples of place, including from immigrant detention centers near the US-Mexico border, run through the landscape of his music, making present the people and places often absented in their own storytelling. As Saporiti stated in the documentary made about his work, which we shared with you in the invitation for this event, history is a mess that doesn't make sense, but songs are such a wonderful way to deal with it. You can sit with the mess and sing through the mess, and that can allow you to shine light on what's happening today. In No No Boy's third album, Empire Electric, which was released just this year, Julian once again creates songs that examine narratives of imperialism, identity, and spirituality. The album tells stories rooted in years of research and relationship building, made vibrant and profound through the integration of instrumental, environmental, and electronically manipulated sounds from Asia and America. Every single sound becomes a part of the poetic recasting of shared post-colonial trauma and the startling joys that can be wrung out of that hardship. We are grateful to have Julian with us today, and we look forward to learning from and being inspired by him. We will now turn things over to Julian, who will discuss his approach to research and creative production, and then we will open up to questions and dialogue. Please use the raise hand feature if you would like to share or ask a question. We encourage you to think about the work you're doing and or would like to do, and the generative ways that research can inform artistic practices and vice versa. I'll turn things over to you, Julian.
Thanks so much, Shada. Thanks so much, Megan. It's been a real pleasure getting to know y'all and working with ASU over the last little while. And today we're going to take this little dinner table size gathering to kind of really just discuss the presentation is like kind of flippantly called anything but a paper. But full disclosure, I did literally yesterday just sign a contract with an academic publisher for a chapter. So I do like papers somewhat. So I say that just because it's like one voice in the wild in academia. But I love reading the stuff. I would never disallow a student to write a paper, but I do encourage students to not write papers because they have so much practice at that when I have time to teach. I want to start by playing you some sounds that we'll get back to. So I have this little thing. It's a little synthesizer, and let's just listen to a few sounds. Is that coming through for y'all? Good. All right, let's listen to something.
Never know, you'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know. You'll never know.
That'll come back into play later. As was mentioned in the brief bio, actually, not brief, way too much, way too long. I always hate sitting through those. That happens a lot, but I appreciate everything, the introduction. Just a little embarrassing to have to do that every time we do one of these. But all that stuff is true. I take sound samples from my research sites. I'm a ethnomusicologist, cultural studies historian kind of person, academically speaking, I suppose. And a lot of what I like to do is stumble. I think I was thinking a lot, talking to Jada and Megan before this talk about how to kind of get across some of the important things maybe that my work does and hopefully offers permission to other, especially younger scholars, students in particular, but also colleagues, to do, and that is to stumble. I'm really not much of an academic compared to a lot of my friends who I did my PhD with, who I noticed were really great students in high school, really voracious readers, great test scores. Then they went to really nice colleges where they didn't take, for instance, like Brazilian hand percussion or like slide guitar or like finger picking blues labs, which was my undergraduate experience. And then they went straight into their PhDs. That was not my route. Mine was very circuitous. And it was a lot of stumbling based off luck and passion. And that's been what has informed the project that I do, this thing called No Boy, which, just in case you're not familiar, is just a teacher trick to get people to read a good book. Any promotional material, including band names, always points to some kind of thing that I read in my academic studies or came across to try to get people to dig into other good stuff. And so this project I do basically takes all of these stories of Asian American history, histories of other refugee and immigrant communities as well, and then turns it into art. So we've made documentaries. The project is based around this collection of folk songs. That's over 100 songs at this point. Concert performances. I was talking about that before we all signed on. Sort of winding that part down, but the initial idea was I was learning about these histories that I'd never learned about growing up in Tennessee, and I realized that most folks had not really learned a lot of these stories, whether it's some of the early histories of like Chinese miners and railroad workers and the really harsh conditions they faced, or when I moved to Wyoming for my first set of graduate courses, learning about the Japanese American incarceration camp in the state. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to remedy the fact that some of my friends who I would go climbing with or be in class with or would be a TA for, they grew up in towns where these actual events happened and never really learned about them, and had as much ignorance as I did of, say, the Cuban Chinese coming up to Mississippi, Arkansas area in kind of post Civil War South, and being this sort of like racial wedge between former slaves and white folks, and being exploited as what they call coolies, or the Japanese internment camps, as they're colloquially known, in Arkansas, a neighboring state. All this Asian history, for me as someone who's half Vietnamese, as an Asian American, I didn't know about growing up in Tennessee. Well, what's a way to remedy that? And it didn't seem like writing academic papers was going to do that trick. Because I wasn't really interested in talking to other academics, because I was a musician before grad school, and like I said, just sort of stumbled into it by virtue of chance and interest and some good mentors. And so I figured, well, I knew how to write folk songs. I did grow up in Tennessee. Not that gives you a license to become a folk singer or anything like that, but I grew up in that industry. My dad was a record company executive, and that's why him and my mom even moved to Nashville in the first place. And so I had been in bands my whole life. Like I said, went to music college for undergrad, had been in a band. That was my profession in my 20s. So it just seemed very natural, if I wanted more people to understand these histories and learn about these stories, why on earth would I think lecturing would be the best way to go about teaching just, regular folks who would never go to a university after they graduated, or if they went at all, like those folks back in Wyoming that I was friends with. Why would I think that writing a peer-reviewed academic paper might be the best way to teach this history on a very kind of like, on-the-ground guttural level? Just this stuff happened in our community. It happened within the borders of the state. It's something that we ought to know about and earn. And I found that to be true. The proof of concept has kind of been put across many times over at this point, just being able to go back to some of the bars that I hung out in Wyoming, or where I'm from in Tennessee, and play concerts everywhere, from churches to those bars to big museums and things like this, and universities, and finding that the work has indeed reached a lot more people. Now, not like a huge amount or anything like that, but relative to an academic, the most you could possibly imagine. Meaning much more than the 3 people on our dissertation committees. So I want to start, I'm not going to go through like whole chunks of the documentaries or music videos that I've made today, because those are all online and can be enjoyed or sat through on your own time. But I do want to share sort of a couple stories that there's some visual accompaniment for. And whenever I give a talk, much like this project, I'm a stumbler. That's like that is my main methodology. It's like I've learned a lot of things, and I try not to put things into boxes of, this is how you learn as an academic, this is how you learn as a musician, this is how you operate in the world. Like, there's no separation of like my jargon when I'm writing a paper or singing a song or speaking to you. It's just I talk how I talk, and I write that way too. And so a lot of that comes from just trying to like be a scholar in the most kind of on the ground way, just devoid of professionalism. I'm not going to start cursing or taking off my shirt or anything, don't worry. But what I mean is I'm not going to be trying trying to get across any big theoretical points today. It's really just kind of methodology from a folk singer's perspective of how that might work in academia, and vice versa, how academia has greatly benefited the folk singer. And I always start wherever I leave off in my real life. This is a cursing-friendly zone. Well, thanks. And recently, just this last week, I got an email and a text from this woman named Denise, who's like an auntie to me. She lives down in San Francisco. She helped me out a lot during my research. She's a Japanese-American lady. And her mom is a great friend of mine. She's like family. She was the singer in this jazz band that I write a lot about. There was this jazz band in Wyoming at that Japanese internment camp called the Georgiagawa Orchestra. And this woman, Joy, she is the last living member of that jazz band. Like this band that formed behind barbed wire. We're all moved mostly from LA, a few from San Francisco, to this horrible incarceration camp in the middle of Wyoming, just outside Yellowstone. And I wrote this song about that band because when I was bumming around Wyoming about 10 years ago now, gosh, I've been doing this a while, but it was about 10 years ago now, I saw this picture of this jazz band, and it changed my life. It was in this little museum where the remnants of the old concentration camp were, and I'd never seen a picture of all Asian faces playing pop music. Like I knew we played violin and piano because our mothers made us, but I didn't know, like aside from myself and a few other indie rock people I knew of, there were, Asian Americans out there playing, this kind of music. And this really was this stumbling into this museum just on a rock climbing trip 10 years ago. This opened the door to my career doing this band thing, this scholar band thing with No Boy. And seeing this picture of the Georgiagawa Orchestra, this big band, so we're talking 1930s, 40s swing music, the music that was popular with just the kids during the war, basically. They wanted to make light in a really dark place, and so these guys formed a band when they were told, take only what you can carry was a familiar refrain when they were all locked up in these camps. These dummies took guitars and trombones and trumpets instead of clothes. And I never related to people more ever in my life than seeing this photograph. Because like growing up, mixed race, looking decidedly different than other people on the playground or in school in Nashville when I was a kid, I wasn't one of these West Coast Asians who thinks it's normal to look like this. I hated my face growing up. It was terrible. Not to say Nashville was like a horrible place or anything. I love that town, but there was definitely some like real kind of self-hatred, right? And it had a lot to do with lack of representation. And then also the otherness that my friends carried with them in their eyes towards my eyes. And so when I finally saw this picture of this Georgiagawa Orchestra, all these Asian American dudes who, look sort of like me, not coming from completely different backgrounds. Ask any Vietnamese person of a certain age, they're not big fans of the Japanese. But, once we're here, we all sort of look the same, look very similar. And it meant something really deep because when I was at Berkeley, when I was, not the smart one, the music one, when I was at the Music Berkeley as an undergrad, I took like 3 jazz history courses, and I never learned about folks who looked like me. And so seeing this picture of this all Japanese American big band, that warmed my heart, just seeing folks who looked like me. But then to zoom out from there, I always tell my students, if we're studying a topic, a time period in history, find the thing you relate to. Because like for most of us presidents or generals, that's not something we aspire to. It's not something we really understand on like a embodied level. But everyone's got something, and in these camps, there was such a wide, diverse array of lived experience, There was like people, maybe you love stories, and you can glom on to the marriages and the dating and the social life that happened. Maybe you love arts and crafts, and you can look at all the shell art and jewelry that was made. Or for me, it was the music, to know that people danced behind the barbed wire with machine guns pointed in and these searchlights. Like, that was how I could get into this history. And I wanted to tell this story. It meant so much to me. So I start here. This is one of many songs from this project, but I start here because Denise, Joy's daughter, the last living member of this band, she emailed me. She said Joy's not doing too well. They had to move her into a room, sort of assisted living, like going on hospice and stuff like that. So I called Joy in her new room in the old folks' home in Honolulu, and I was just caught up with her. And it was like very emotional because this woman has given me so much. And she has one of these people who's like directed my life in an amazing way. And I want to share this little bit of this documentary. This is the first like sort of multimedia thing I made for this project. And this was back, it was a while ago, when I was a grad student at Brown, and I took a trip out to Hawaii. Thank you, Ivy League, for the funding. And I got to meet Joy. I had found out, you know, the band members of this band, and I found out she was the last one alive. I was like, I got to talk to her. So we started talking and emailing back and forth and talked to her on the phone and interviewed her. And then we just became buddies, and she started just like emailing me whenever bad weather would pass through Providence, Rhode Island, like real grandma shit, like total grandma shit. And she became like a really close personal friend. So I want to just play a little bit of this. All of the things I'm going to show you as a teacher, these are all things I would give at least a B+ too. So just keep that in mind. Song like that. Are you getting the sound from that?
Oh, it's a thrill and an honor, because if we were back home in Los Angeles, I know the opportunity would never have come to me. George and Chikan, Susumui.
So these are the two Shotokians.
Yeah, Ayami.
And is that
That's Tet.
Yeah.
And this is Eiko, the pianist.
Eiko, the pianist, yeah.
Watanabe.
So what did it mean for someone like George Igawa to bring that music to camp? What did it mean for the teenagers in camp?
Oh, it was wonderful. And he was a professional before the war, a professional musician. And he also played with the Shotokian in Japan. He was skillful enough, knowledgeable enough to write the charts for the bands. I didn't know anything. I just had a lot of guts. No brains, all guts.
It's just a
I skip ahead a little bit.
We're from Hawaii, so they got the drinks.
The reason I traveled all the way to Honolulu was not only to talk to my friend Joy after so many years of emails and phone calls, but also to play music with her. To hear from the singer herself the songs which she sang at Heart Mountain. So we put together a concert for the families of old military veterans and friends. Aaron and I sang the songs I had written about Heart Mountain. Stories that are rarely told, about the mothers, about the women, about the resistors, about the people who lost their lives in these camps. And we even played a song I had written for Joy, called The Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming.
The flyer red musicians needed, so young Yoni grabbed his silver mouthpiece, tracked down the kid who brought a trumpet to Pomona, let Yoni have it on a free 2-year leave. Joy Teraoka, Nate Takashida, went to the tryout, she was only 15, with some girlfriends to cheer her on. Their club was called the Raiders. Mom said if you keep up with school, Joy, you can sing.
All right. So that is from a little movie called For Joy. I guess it's not that creative of a title. But the yeah, just sort of like it's a movie I made for that museum, right? So that place that showed me this picture, God, it'd be hard to find even if I told you where it was. Between these two little towns of Cody and Powell, exactly where the camp was, and they do a pretty good job. But it's a small little museum. But you know, I kept working with them. That's sort of the neat thing I think about having these skills, or a skill, folk singer, musician guy. Video maker at this point, I guess. I I put together an exhibit after I'd done all this research on the Georgia Orchestra and the music of the camps, because I was interested, because each one of these 10 Japanese American incarceration camps had music of all sorts. The opening and in between act, when the Georgia Orchestra would play, they would normally play 2 sets. It's kind of the old big band style, because they'd do these 4-hour concerts because people wanted to dance all night. The sort of in between intermission band was this band called Alfred Tanaka and the Surf Riders, and they played lap steel and ukulele, and it was just like absolutely amazing. They even had the Alfred Tanaka and the Surf Riders had a weekly show on a radio station in Powell, Wyoming, KPOW, outside of the camp. Just so much once you dig into it. But I wanted to start that, and kind of like, I decided today to talk about Joy, one, because she's very much in my heart and don't know how much longer she'll be with us, and she really is like family to me, which I think through this stumbling method that I do is one of the things that really can happen. There isn't really a lot of professional pretense. There's no professional goals for me or anything with this work. It's just kind of like moving on to what feels good and right, and I think that's why I use music and to tell my stories, and I think that's why I've been able to cultivate relationships like the one with Joy and find, real found family out of this project. But I want to kind of break down this song inspired by Joy in tribute to her, because it comes from a lot of different places. You see in that video, within the video itself, you see this moment that is as valuable as the reading or recitation of any paper to me as an academic, which is having these research questions and then going to sit with an old lady in a scrapbook, right? Something that we're often dismissive of, I feel like, in our culture. But the wisdom and the years of learning and knowledge embodied in these amazing scrapbooks that Joy had put together from her time in camp and up through her whole life, the entire biography laid out in black and white and then color photos, was one of the most more momentous than any lecture I could have gone to, any history lecture. To sit with someone who knew what it was like to hang out in that band practice room that I had only imagined through that one photograph and the newspaper archives I had dug through that were published in the camps, all these little scraps, to have someone tell me what it was like to know these folks as best as like a 16-year-old girl could know, like, some probably pretty colorful 30-year-old musicians, as we tend to be. I think Joy definitely saw them from a removed place and didn't get into the shenanigans they got into when they would leave camp and go play gigs and stuff like that. But man, like, that alone is something that has like been so instructive. Just those moments you see of me and then one of my grad school colleagues who went out to research with me, just sitting down with this old lady and going through her family history, which happens to tie into a monumental American history. It's influenced my work so much because a lot of what I do, like when I perform live, I always have photos and visuals from the archives behind me when I perform. A lot of that is from that scrapbook methodology. The honest answer is actually it's because I do stuff for high schoolers sometimes, and they'll be fucking bored if I don't have pictures on a screen. It's the truth. And so you just try to do anything to, take the weight off their teachers for 30 minutes when they hire you to do an assembly. But that's part of what Joy gave me. I saw how powerful it was to sing with her, and then to also have these visuals in her scrapbook, and to look at those photos of camp and her friends while she would sing a song from the time period like Sentimental Journey or something like that. And so that's a lot of where I took my own method or practice, I suppose, of combining archival visuals with music. And so I want to play you just a couple snippets. We ended that last movie on, I had written this song, Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming, for Joy and for the band. It's very kind of 9-verse folk song, Woody Guthrie type thing, where you just tell this big long story. It's all very true and accurate. But writing a song, that's something you can do in a paper. You can tell the linear biography of a band. But adding the music on top of it, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. How can the music itself tell a story? So let me pick up my axe real quick. So when it was time, is it just my screen or can you see me too? You can see me too?
We can see you.
Okay, because I want to show another video. But so when I was thinking about, okay, what kind of music should we do for this? Because I'm not going to do like a 1930s, 40s jazz standard, although that would be fun, and I like that music. I thought a lot about, okay, in camp, the Georgia Gallo Orchestra was really interesting because from my research and from what Joy told me, what another person who unfortunately died but was in the band told me, George did this thing where he combined Japanese music and arranged traditional Japanese music for the big band. And it was one of the first instances ever of what we would call like fusion music in America. And it must have been so fascinating to hear, like having shamisen and koto and these Asian instruments alongside arranged with trumpets and trombones and all this kind of stuff. So I thought, okay, well, how can I, maybe I'll do this folk song, but I'll put some horns on it. And when it came time for the melody, it's like this. And that's just a very minor pentatonic-y, Asian-y kind of thing we got going on. That's like where the music is coming from. So it's a cowboy song. It's a Wyoming song. This is where I was living. This is what I was absorbing at the time. But we're using like, So we're trying to combine using horns, using this kind of folk vernacular that's honest to me as a songwriter coming from Nashville, and then also using some of those Japanesey scales, these very Eastern Asian scales, to produce something. So we have that musical layer, which can sort of help maybe embody the band a little bit, at least in my mind as a musician. And then we, like I said, the band, No No Boy, is named after a book, a trick to get people to read a book. So when they Google my band name, they might go to the UW Press website. And I know a lot of people have ordered the book. And that's, as a teacher, an amazing thing to do. We also have to do these things when you work with a record label like I do, like make these promotional videos. So I was like, okay, how can I jam as much... So like, I really love, I don't know if you guys watch these reaction videos on YouTube. It's a wonderful medium, and it's mostly Gen Z kids like playing 3 seconds of a Taylor Swift or some other popular music video and then pausing it and explaining what's happening. Like here's all these Easter eggs. Here's where she used to date Harry Styles. You can see right here. She says this in the background, this corner, and they zoom in. It's like, okay, how can we use a music video to like teach or put Easter eggs in that are historically accurate, like as if those videos had footnotes. And so let's play a little bit of this music video for Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming.
The flyer red musicians needed, so young Yone grabbed the silver mouthpiece.
Okay, so that's actually Yone. That was the other musician who was still alive.
The silver mouthpiece.
So we actually, like, again, using Joy's scrapbook method, we're able to put some archival photos in here. It's a tribute, but it's also a place of historical teaching. So much of the time, in academic books, maybe there will be like, what they call like figures, right? Like they'll take 10 photos from the archives, put it in the middle of the book. But to me, it's like I want to sit alongside these photos as I listen to music embodying this band, and how can we make this kind of an immersive historical experience? The other thing I'll point to is my incredible wife, who's downstairs studying right now for her constitutional law exam. She embroidered this jacket, and I would love to show this to you, but it's actually in this great museum called the Wing Luke Museum, the Asian American Art Museum in Seattle right now. And this, on the back of this is my Taylor Swift Easter egg moment right now. If you actually go into the Heart Mountain Archive, which you probably wouldn't do because it's hard to find, one. And two, you have to go into the actual archive, not the museum. There is an uncatalogued, unnamed watercolor of a dragon fighting a bald eagle, which I snapped a picture of. And then Amelia hand embroidered this into the back of my stage jacket. This is just so meaningful to me because, one, it's like carrying the spirit. Obviously, it's a little on the nose, dragon fighting a bald eagle if you're Asian American. But for someone to paint this while being incarcerated in Wyoming in a camp, that's very layered within itself. And then for, my wife, also Asian American, to then embroider this onto the back of my jacket while we sing this song, there's a lot of meaning there. And so that's the other thing I'll point out. And then, so we made this video on an iPhone during the pandemic. So we were in our studio apartment, which was less than 400 square feet in Portland, Oregon. And we're like, oh God, how we have to put out this album. How the heck are we going to make a music video? We literally can't go outside. This was like early pandemic days, and Portland was way more agitated by the pandemic than, say, like where I'm from in Nashville, where it didn't happen. And so the background you see is it's a replica or sort of a recreation of actual archival photographs from the Heart Mountain camp where they would do kabuki theater. And this was like they had a very two-tone background. We kind of guessed on the colors and what worked well with my skin and stuff like that. But then they also, obviously, you see the origami cranes. And then we ordered all these like flowers off Amazon, but that was like a tribute to all the paper flower making, which was a big pastime. So every single layer of this music video, again, at least a B+ for a final project. Every single layer of this music video has some kind of footnoted, like verifiable history to it. It points to one either photograph or newspaper article or archival object, and then it turns it into the art that we see. And then obviously we have the actual, what do you call it, archival photographs.
To cheer on, their club was called the Rodells. Mom said if you keep up the school joy, you can sing.
So, and then we have a photograph not of Joy, but up from the Heart Mountain camp, sort of showing a lot of what was the divide between the older generation, the Issei folks, first generation immigrants, and their kids within these camps, right? You have the schoolgirl or the young woman, and then you have the family on the other side of the fence, sort of embodying how much more difficult it was if you were older. We have, again, we couldn't do anything. This was like literally shot, that was shot against the wall. This is shot on the floor. This scene here, this is a silhouette of Heart Mountain. Amelia, again, who's just this awesome costume designer, craftsperson, she just cut these out of felt. We were like, okay, the Smithsonian's going to give us $1,000 to make a music video. What can we buy off Amazon to do this? And so, yeah, just sort of like staging these scenes with whatever we could do. But again, getting the number of windows on the barracks right, or getting the outline of the mountain correct, and sort of, again, working off historical photographs. You have, again, like archival photos where that's Tet Special. And then there's these like nifty little moments where I said Alfred Tanaka and the Surf Riders. You see KPOW. This was the actual radio station that was in the town over from Heart Mountain. So it's a tribute to that and the fact that the Surf Riders like had this weekly show. You have this photograph. Of course, this is the one that I saw in the museum that turned me on to all of this. And so it's like, what can you do? What can you do as a historian with any kind of like creative outlet or talent? It's sort of trying to say that it works in both directions for me equally. Like, I have this skill that I've cultivated since I was a kid of making music and writing songs. So if I have a whole world to build from, that is to say the history of this band, wow, that's really going to infiltrate the lyrics, the melody of the song, the music video, all of this kind of stuff in a really meaningful way. And I kind of want to end, I've been talking too long, so we should get to a discussion. But I want to end by showing you what I consider the true proof of concept for this project. I remember when I told my dissertation committee and my advisor, my music advisor, ironically in particular, he said that I wanted to like turn my dissertation into songs. He said, make sure it's legible to academics. He's like very uptight, wonderful guy, but very uptight, like Princeton PhD, classical musician. And he was like, make sure it's legible. And I was like, how are songs going to be less legible than academic writing? I just really didn't understand what he was saying. I think he meant professionally, like, make sure you can get a job. And I don't know if that would happen or will happen, but this next thing, this is where we'll end my presentation portion because I've just stumbled. And this is really what drives home that this is a worthwhile project. So I've written this song, Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming. A lot of people have heard the song through the records maybe, but certainly through the internet and streaming and that music video and stuff like that on the radio. Very cool. That's awesome. But it always means so much when my academic colleagues, I think because of that make it legible comment that my advisor gave me, reach out. Because it's like, yes, they find it legible, Dana. At least like some of the younger ones do. And so my friend Jessie Vallejo, who is an ethnomusicologist at Cal Poly Pomona, she wrote me just like a fan email, like not even like a normal colleague to colleague thing. It's like, hey, I've worked for Folkways in the past. Like, I'm a huge fan of this album that the Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming's on. Can you send me the lyrics? And I said, okay. And I asked her why. And she said, well, I teach mariachi down at Cal Poly Pomona. I would love to arrange this song as a mariachi song because I find it has a lot in common with like old Mexican folk songs, which like are verse after verse and tell these interesting stories of immigrants and travelers and stuff like this. And I said that'd be awesome. And then she emailed me back a while later. She's like, do you ever come down to universities? Would you come down and teach a little bit and hang out and like maybe we could play some music together? And I said, absolutely. And so this is what she transformed the song into. And it was incredibly meaningful because Pomona, where Jessie lives and teaches, it's mentioned in the Best Goddamn Band in Wyoming. That's because before all of them were shipped off to Heart Mountain, the Japanese Americans were sent to these assembly centers, right, before the camps were built. And these were old fairgrounds or racetracks. And so they were sent to the Pomona Fairplex, which is still there today. And Jessie lives right by there, runs right by there all the time. And she was really struck by that lyric because it's where she lives. And I told her more about that. I told her that George Igawa just basically got all this ragtag crew together at the Fairplex where they were stuffed into horse stalls. And some folks had, like, to keep folks busy, put on talent shows. And George formed the band there. And basically to, lift people's spirits throughout all this. And 75, 80 years later, Jessie comes along. And she's playing music in that exact same Fairplex. Not just when the fair's happening, because that happens all the time. She's playing music for a bunch of detained migrant kids because they're using the Fairplex during the pandemic very similarly to how they used it as a holding station for these Japanese Americans in 1942. They're using it, luckily, to reunite young migrant kids with family in America. But they're still being held in this space. So Jessie herself is playing with her mariachi band in a very interesting parallel to how George Igawa used music in this camp. So Jessie invites me down. We do some teaching. And it was super meaningful because we go to the Fairplex, and I find the space where the Igawa band would have first performed and first formed. And I play that song on the spot. And it's not just Jessie, it's also colleagues from the university. And it's city council members, and it's Fairplex employees who didn't know this history. Didn't know the history of the band that formed there. And it was really meaningful. So we'll end the presentation with a little bit of this music video, how Jessie wonderfully transformed my song into something much more and gave it so much more meaning. And again, this is like sort of what I hang my hat on as I hang this project up.
The flyer read, musicians needed. So young Yoni grabbed a silver mouthpiece, tracked down a kid who brought a trumpet to Pomona. Leone had it on a free 2-year lease. Joy Teraoka, named Takeshita, went to the trial, she was only 16, with some girlfriends to cheer her on. Their club was called the Rodells. Mom said if you keep up with school, Joy, you can sing. Georgie Gawa, Oji Nisei, he toured up the coast, he even played Japan. Before the war, they ripped up the Florida ballroom and don't sleep on those Shotokians. O la luz estela bailaron tras las púas, en la sierra sobrevivieron por cantar. Hasta scouts and disparos de sus pueblos, la banda más chingón en Wyoming.
So all of that is online, all those videos and stuff. So if you want to watch more, knock yourself out. But since we have this group of people here, and you have me in the utility closet of my studio for the next few minutes, I'd love to turn it over to y'all if there's any particular questions. I think basically what we've done is through one song, I had a few more prepared to be honest with you, but through this song, thinking about my friend Joy out in Honolulu right now and her old band, how do you take that one photograph in that research question? Who the fuck are these guys? There was music in these camps? What the fuck? That was my research question. How do you then turn it into years of dialogue through a folk song, through music videos, through albums, through conversations, and most importantly, collaboration with my colleagues in the academy. And that's where we are, and I think that's sort of what that shows. And so I would love to turn it over to Megan, Jada, and anyone else since we're here.
Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your work with us. I mean, especially coming off of the end of a very busy semester, it was so nice to be here and just experience your work and hear you talk through the process. And I just have to say that I'm fascinated by the idea of like stumbling and scrapbooking as a methodology. I'm definitely going to be kind of incorporating that into my research classes. And
I love it.
I think it's really inspiring for students to know that they can give their methodology a name as a way of kind of claiming it and owning it and, you know, kind of nurturing it. So thank you so much for just sharing that process with us. And I was also really struck by and inspired by how research for you seems to be a way of developing relations and deep friendships, and even sitting and playing music with someone and developing a close bond with someone is also kind of a way of doing research. And oftentimes when we think about research, we think about the researcher as having this kind of objective and distance relationship with whatever it is or whoever it is that they're studying. And so I love that you're instead kind of, you know, showing that research can be intimate and can promote community and, you know, deep friendships and bonds. And so I found that really inspiring too. And just your focus on joy when you said that you were, you know, kind of inspired by the fact that just knowing that people danced and made music in these spaces where there was also, you know, deep sadness and trauma, and how, you know, your act of making music is also a way of turning those experiences into joy. I mean, I just love your focus on joy when it comes to the research process. So thank you for all of it. And I definitely want to turn it over to some other folks, because I know that there are some folks in the room too who whose own work connects to so much of what you were talking about. I'm thinking specifically of Cindy and Alec and others. So I'm sure many folks in the room have questions for you, but I just want to thank you again for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thanks, Jada, and thanks for having me and letting me share. Appreciate that.
So are there any questions for Julian, or any comments or observations that y'all want to share?
Go ahead and jump in, Cindy, and I'll follow up.
So I'm going to quickly just give a thread of what my research has been this year as I'm wrapping up my master's degree. I have to credit Megan and Jada, Dr. Todd, Dr. Och, and then you, because that's the thread where it started. And so after I saw your documentary, in the spring, I interviewed a gentleman who he and his family, he has a boy, had been at Santa Anita Raceway in the Assembly Center before he went to Heart Mountain. And he grew up there. He eventually ended up as a Japanese American in the Korean War, but his family was there. So I was interviewing him, and he's not that chatty about the past because it's a long time ago. He's 92. So I was kind of like, okay, he's not that, there's not that much to pull out of him. His daughter walked in and she told me a whole story about, she didn't hear until she was a sophomore in college that he had been in a camp and her mother had been at Manzanar. So that started because of you and because I had seen through our studies. And so now fast forward, I just, so the idea of the stories they didn't tell us, meaning our parents, and the stories that come out in ways, when you're adult, that was my history. That was my lived experience with my dad. And I ended up, I was unable to interview him in the end before he passed, but I interviewed a friend of mine who was 1975. She came from Vietnam, fall of Saigon. And I interviewed her. I ended up being able to interview her kids. And I just submitted it to the Phoenix Film Festival.
Oh, amazing.
So I blame you.
I'm happy to share some of the blame, but I'm sure I don't deserve much of it. That's amazing.
This is stumbling. This is completely stumbling. So you're intrigued by something, it sparks something else. My dad said, oh, Charles Yada was in, and then like, oh, maybe I'll talk to him. And one thing led to another. So when you talk about stumbling, and if you're curious and you make these connections, like all this stuff can happen. That's just amazing. And it translates to sleep deprivation and, because your mind is churning and you're thinking like, oh, another thing. And, oh, I want to, But so that's the beauty of, and then because I was able to do it in the sort of the form or the shape of studying with Dr. Och and Dr. Todd, I could sort of make the space and the mind space to do it. So anyway, that's a long rambling to say thank you to three of you.
No, thank you so much. And I mean, that really warms my heart. I mean, I think it's so wonderful. I found a lot more, I think we don't give enough credit to shorter graduate programs, to master's programs, because I find there's less, obviously there's less of a professional track that you're on. And a lot of times it's a more diverse student body too. Like myself, coming in, having lived this whole career as a musician and bringing that, I think Jada and Megan, when we talked before this a while back about bringing in your own sources of knowledge, like and making sure our professors respect that, like the different knowledge bases that people bring in, because it's really cool if you can talk about Derrida and Foucault, I guess, or Judith Butler or whatever. But most people, that's completely impenetrable, and that's a lot of like histrionics in the writing and anyways. But I think respecting what people bring in the life experience, especially people of different life experiences bring in, Cynthia or Cindy, is you go by Cindy? Yeah. So I think a lot of what you said, like, this project, finding joy is kind of this, what I affectionately call my Japanese grandma, was really meaningful. And there's a few folks who are like that from this project, who are just truly close, like buddies and friends and people I can bullshit with. I find that to be the litmus test of if there's a real connection, if you can speak unencumbered, especially as an academic these days. And there's a few people I found like that, but a lot of the inspiration and maybe this is sort of like what you're talking about with your dad, is I didn't have these questions to ask my grandmother before she passed away. And I never took my French that seriously. Like we're a very French colonial Vietnamese family, so they all spoke Vietnamese, but they first language was often French, and they all moved to France after the war, after the fall of Saigon, except for my mom. And so when I was a boy, I'd be over in Paris all the time visiting my family, but I kind of stopped speaking French like around 12, like fluently. So I speak like a 12-year-old's French. And in those sweet years of like my early 20s, when my grandma was still alive, she was living with nuns in this little town called Saint Denis outside Paris in this convent. I remember singing songs for her, but her English wasn't great, never was. It didn't need to be. And my French was just always a 12-year-old French. And I really wish I had asked her all those questions. And that is like the emotional impetus of this project. And I think that is something along with like my musical methodology that really informed like how I teach. So many of my final projects are just like, if you have an auntie, please interview her. That's all I want you to do. I want you to sit down for a scrapbook session with your auntie, the scrapbook that you've never bothered to give any mind to, all the years that you've been in her like dusty old house in Florida or wherever. I want you to like hear the stories and use that as your archive. My history advisor at Brown, Robert Lee, he wrote this great book called Orientals, and OG Asian American guy, Asian American studies guy, not OG Asian American guy. I guess he is, but he taught this class about the family photo as archive, family photography as archive, and that really made a huge impact on me. And so a lot of what you said, Cindy, just is so resonant about loss as like inspiration, I guess, or silence, right? The stories that they didn't tell us. It's a beautiful thing to share. So I really appreciate that. And congratulations on finishing up. That's a wonderful accomplishment and makes me very proud. I think
Thank
everyone here is.
you.
Yeah. That's
And
great.
thanks to Dr. Todd and Dr. Ach.
We're so grateful to have worked with you for the last few years. And I just want to follow up. I'm still curious, like I'm thinking a lot about the tensions, right, between stumbling and like just creative process, because a lot of creative process is stumbling and like being okay with, like you said about history, the mess, right? Like, and how in academia, there's a lot of emphasis on like, here's the plan, this is what you're doing, and kind of knowing ahead of time. And, when you're writing grants and when you're doing this. So I've been thinking a lot about this tension of imagining and like future casting, and with like there's I'm not exactly sure what my question is in there, but I think it's interesting to think about how to leverage that place, because that creative process and curiosity and what can happen through a process where you don't have it all figured out and it goes A to B to C. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that kind of tension.
Absolutely. Another thing that we've talked about, before this conversation, the three of us in organizing this is, is along these lines. It's ideas of, I don't know if I brought this up specifically, but probably my biggest academic mentor, this guy, George Lipsitz, who taught at UCSB in San Diego for a long time, a sociologist. He's been my mentor. I never took a class from him. I was never at the same university, but he's like a big Asian, he's not Asian American. He's a Black studies scholar. He's a white guy. But one of the best sociologists and one of the like big guys in American studies. And he was brought into University of Wyoming when I was a master's student there, when I was finishing up. And I was the grad student assigned to drive him around. That was put upon me. So I just had to like be at his beck and call all weekend, him and his partner, BT, Barbara Tomlinson. And he was the coolest guy ever. BT was really cool too. And I never took a course with him, but through eating Chinese food with him, just driving him to the airport, staying in touch via email, all this kind of stuff, it really opened up doors for me, because he he related music. He's not a musician, but he loves music and he writes about it all the time in a real one-to-one way. He gave me permission to be a musician, like use musical methodology, all the methodology of being a touring musician, right? Of which is very helpful to the ethnographer, because when you're on tour and you're just in a different city every night, you have to make friends at the bar. Otherwise, you don't make any friends and it's super lonely. So every night you have to be kind of open after your set to like hanging out with people and talking to people and this kind of stuff. And so he allowed me to put that in there. And then he also said, oh, you're really cool. I've enjoyed these conversations. Why don't you apply to grad school and drop my name? Because that'll help you get into American studies programs. And it did. And that was very generous and nice of him. But he writes about improvisation. And that's really important to what you're talking about. And he writes about how musical improvisation, the improvisation of jazz musicians, right? We get together, we might know the melody of the tune and the harmony, and maybe the drummer or the bass player sets the rhythm or the tempo that it's going to be at. But aside from that very scant information, the skeleton of it, applying the flesh and the hair and the makeup is all, and the clothing is all up to us when we're building this creation. And he wrote a book with two other colleagues called The Fierce Urgency of Now, about improvisation as a legitimate methodology for academic work and collaboration on top of that. And I think what you're saying to me, that's what that triggers, because that's what there needs to be more space for. In order to do this project, there had to be a lot of just wait and see. I guess what like sketch people or improv people call like the yes and or whatever. Not a theater person, I don't know. But I thought back to those classes at Berkeley where we literally had to improvise. Again, it's like a clown school. It's wonderful. But I'm sitting there and I'm just playing guitar and I have to learn to play off what other people give me. And the academics that I do keep up with, it's always the ones who will let me be in that space. And it doesn't work for a lot of people. Like a lot of people just like, I remember in the American Studies program at Brown, I had to take a class that was just called professionalism or something like that. And I couldn't stand it. It was literally like me and then, you know, the typical grad student and the teacher who's like, they're all geniuses, way smarter than me, but they didn't have those reps of like having to hang at the bar and just make friends and stuff like that. So an entire class period was devoted to how do you strike up a conversation after a conference at the bar? Like, no joke. Like, that's literally what we spent 45 fucking minutes talking about, is like, how do you talk to another human being at the bar for networking purposes? Because you might get that job later. And that was when I was just like, all right, whatever. Like, they're giving me this money at least for 6 years. I got healthcare. This is great. I can do this project. You know, I looked at it like a big artist residency, and then I was out. And again, like stuff like this, working with y'all, I might stumble back into it, and that's really cool. But it's always going to be based off of just, I have this thing that I do. Y'all have this thing that you do. Maybe it works for the students. Maybe it works for each other to make us better scholars. But I realized like I prioritize the scholarship way too much to be an academic, if that makes sense. Like I care way too much about what I study to be in the capital A Academy at this point in my life. Because my friends who are in my same year, my cohort, they can't do what I do. And so that's kind of what I think about. I think about improvisation and making space for that.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that relates to the museum work that you did, in terms of like how I just think there's a lot of ways to be an like a public intellectual or whatever, to bring that work into the world in ways that are in the academy and next to it or something. And I think we had a question, if you want to jump in next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zena.
Hi, Zena.
Thank you for hosting this. Thank you for sharing all the stories in your work. I found this deeply meaningful and have never expected to be a little weepy in a lecture like this. So just deeply appreciative of this. So a little bit about myself and then my question. I am, among many things, an installation artist. A lot of my work is translating archival wonky stuff about government policies that affect mostly marginalized communities in this country into physical, room-sized, interactive experiences for people to understand both public policy failures and future versions of America that could better serve all of us in it. And in doing this work, and I have an upcoming project that is Smithsonian funded about the Asian American women's experience, where I'm focusing on interviewing Asian American women organizers and artists of today about their visions for America in the future and displaying it in a museum in DC in the spring of next year. My question is, I find myself like kind of a weirdo amongst weirdos, like artists are already weirdos. And I feel like I rarely meet other artists who translate archival materials into something that's like tangible and like you feel it in your gut. And I am seeking community with more artists like that. So my question for you, Julian, is are there communities of us weirdos out there? Like, where do you find artistic sounding boards or other folks who are interested in transforming archives?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate that, and I look forward to hopefully running into your work when it's up. Is it which museum is it at?
It is a collaboration with two other artists. I'll drop the URL if
Please.
that's okay with
Yeah.
facilitators into the Zoom chat. My piece will be up for all of May at Hyrick House Museum in Washington, D.C. It is one of the most well-kept Victorian houses in America, and they've decided to host artists that are making work about immigration and labor in America. So
Wow, what a twofer there. That's like,
yeah.
well, yeah, well, thanks so much. Please drop the link. I think everyone would appreciate that. Yeah, community's really weird. Through this project, I have come in and out of, I think, ideas of community or affinity groups, and I was searching so hard for that when I went to grad school because I grew up so far away from anyone who looked like me, and then like because of all the kind of shit I went through when I was a little kid, especially watching my mom, who's a wonderful Asian American woman artist herself, get berated by people in Nashville. I just tried to, it was like a literal keep your head down kind of situation. So even when I got to high school and there was a few Asian people, a few Near Eastern people in my class, I really didn't relate to anyone to the point where all my early songs in my mind were like a white protagonist, even if they were autobiographical. So this project that I do is very much like a reckoning with that and a sort of unwhitewashing of self as a musician, as a songwriter. And I can't tell you enough how much the historical archive helped, because like when there wasn't a lineage, or at least I couldn't perceive a lineage of other artists, and in my particular case, pop musicians, finding that photograph and then finding the Vietnamese bands that played when the US was occupying or the French was over there, and like turning that into song and becoming friends with some of those people who made music, or researching the Cambodian rock bands or all the Filipino musicians over the last 120 years who have taken American music and spread it all across the Pacific, because for some reason Filipinos just seem to be really great at spreading American popular music and embodying it so well. That created like a community for me, I guess, because the God's honest truth is I've been disappointed by the actual community spaces. I was just talking with I get these wonderful emails sometimes from like younger artists who ask for like advice, and or students, undergrads and stuff, and who will email me like, like I have office hours or something like that. And I'm always happy to like meet with them on Zoom and talk to them about stuff. And I was talking to this kid who's doing this incredible like like punk rock Vietnamese puppet musical in Minnesota right now. And it's like fucking crazy and I love it. But we were kind of co-commiserating. I don't know if I have to say co-commiserating, commiserating over how sort of like BIPOC artist affinity groups and community spaces have like not felt completely right. How it's like kind of sometimes prioritizing things over the art first, I guess. And then also, you know, my experience growing up, like I said, how there was always something missing when it was like a musical space I felt comfortable in, but I always felt like an odd person out. So I think sometimes you're just stuck in between, but that's okay. Like the in between is fine. And I find that through having meaningful personal connections, like not necessarily having to be part of a gang. You know, some people are in the right time and place to feel like they're part of a state or a community or a nation. And then some people, by virtue of just how their brain works, or maybe how they present themselves, or for any Vietnamese person, it's just not the right 100-year period for you, to be honest, to be a South Vietnamese person and really fit in anywhere. That's just how it works, you know? And I find, you know, I lean into the things I can help, you know? I find the pieces of Asian Americanness that I do really get along with, like my Buddhist practice and the Vietnamese monks who came over, stuff like that. I find inspiration from history that I study. And I don't try to force it at this point. And that might be the Buddhist thing too. That's helping. But not bemoaning a not fitting in. Trying to find the places where I don't feel lonely, however that is. And I find process in art, and especially making, even though it's difficult art, like I think Jada said earlier, focusing on joy, the process of finding joy through the art. So honestly, yeah, I wish I had a better answer, but you know, for me, community has kind of capital C community has become something I don't really worry about too much. And if you do something I like, no matter who you are, I will want to have a conversation with you, I think. And you could be a 38-year-old South Vietnamese person from Tennessee, and I might not like you at all. Just because we're the same doesn't mean that we'll get along. So that's kind of where I am with it. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but I'm really looking forward to checking out your stuff. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Super helpful and thoughtful reminder that community is flexible and is kind of everywhere and doesn't have to come from an institution.
Absolutely.
And I think that Jamie might have had a question. Jamie?
I do, thank you. I love this whole conversation about community. My name is Jamie. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and my background is in community journalism and feature writing. I currently work in the psychiatry department at the U of A, University of Arizona, and I'm looking at creating a community event series focusing on different mental health issues through a film and documentary series that incorporates art and music as well. And part of what I'm envisioning is having panel discussions after the film screenings, with the hope that people with the lived experiences will be part of the panel discussions, because I feel like it is important for people with the living with mental illnesses speak. So there's like face to the struggles.
Mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated your process in the documentary of going to people in the detention centers, I think it was in Texas, and giving that gift of music before asking questions or conducting interviews. And you're implementing that idea of reciprocation and conversation and establishing rapport. And the people who are in these camps currently or in the past, they're dealing with intense trauma. So I'm curious about how you approach asking questions about their experiences and delicately navigating the trauma they're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks, Jamie. And thanks for the work that you do on multiple levels. It sounds really interesting and important. Yeah, so I guess we'll specifically talk about that documentary that was shared in the link to this Zoom. the one that the Smithsonian produced about my last album, 1975. There's a scene where I'm down. There's a few. I mean, it's in Texas and Mexico. So we're down in Matamoros and Brownsville. We're also down in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. I'd done work in Tijuana and San Diego, all these borderland spaces across the river. And, you know, this was going back to Zena's question about community. When I got to Brown University, I was trying so hard to fit in. And I'd never been to a place like that before. I'm from the middle of the country. I am born and raised toxic bro. Like, this is the community that I come from. This is like who raised me, and God love most of them for sure. And I had just been in Wyoming for 3 years before that, which I can't tell you how different being at a state school, the one state school in the entire state of Wyoming, and then going to the most progressive and activist Ivy League school was. And I was trying to fit in, and it hurt so bad. Like, it was the most ill-fitting thing ever. And part of that was because coming from a community of, I guess, refugees, my mom would never refer to herself like that, but like, that's what those Vietnamese folks are. It was so weird to see people protesting all the time with no basis, no real lived experience in it, I guess. And sort of flattening out refugees as like a political statement with no nuance. And that's one of the reasons why I love writing songs, is because they can be so multi-layered and juxtapose so many different opposing feelings on top of each other, which is every refugee that I've met, because they're just humans like all of us. And that's all we are, is just a bunch of juxtapositions. And so when that Muslim ban thing, that nonsense was happening from the president, you know, I went down with my buddies Diego and Juan, and later trips with my now wife Amelia, to the border, because I was like protesting outside the Capitol, but I didn't know any of these people that were trying to come across the border. And I was screaming some pretty certain things at no one, at like the stone. And I was just screaming. And I kind of was like, why am I doing this? Like, there's a catharsis and it helps. And there's optics, like real optics that matter with those protests that I support. But for me personally, it's like, what is actually happening down there? Like, I would like to take my spring break and just go see what's happening. And so Jamie, we did that. We went down on the worst spring break trip you could ever imagine, going down to the border to detention centers instead of fucking Cancun or whatever. And like, we saw, and I played music, and the documentary, of course, it's like a promo film. So it makes it look like, I think, maybe more, I don't know what the word would be. The first time I ever played music in a refugee center in Laredo, I was just singing one of the No No Boy songs, which is called Boat People, which is about all these Vietnamese refugees and stuff like that. And I was like, why am I singing a song about refugees to a room full of refugees? This is the last thing that these people fucking need. This is stupid. And I felt so dumb. And only by the graciousness of the audience afterwards, who, you know, they mostly spoke Spanish. They didn't even hear what I was saying, the lyrics. A friend of mine who had just escaped, like literally being caged in a basement and having to pay a $12,000 ransom to a coyote and dropped off across the border, then an ICE detention center. She came up to me and said, "Thank you. The music was very helpful." So that was lovely. But I felt like an idiot, like singing songs about historical refugees to current day refugees instead of just singing like some nice Beatles songs or something like that, which would have been much more appropriate. I didn't ask any questions, hardly at all, that first day I was down there. What I did was I asked this guy, Pastor Mike, who, I don't know if he's in this documentary or not, but Pastor Mike ran that Laredo center. I don't think he is, but he gave us all this information. He was the minister at this place. It housed 70 people a night who had just been dropped off from ICE detention centers, just like in the worst state. And I was like, "What do you need, man?" And he just said, the kids just need underwear. So we just went to Walmart and bought all the underwear from the Walmart and then brought it back. And we didn't ask anyone anything other than just played basketball and soccer with the kids and hung out with some of the people and had conversations. Later, like my friend Anahi, the one who said the music was very nice, despite the sad lyrics that she didn't understand. Later, we became friends and she told me the story, and I've incorporated that into my work, sort of on her behalf, at her behest. And that's only happened organically, because the idea of going in and singing a song and then thinking that earns you anything for people who have been through what these people have been through just doesn't hold water. Now, I think it's important, obviously, for journalists to go down and tell these stories and stuff like that. But for me, it has to be about the hang, to be colloquial about it. You just got to be a good hang. And so you got to be down there for a while. And sometimes playing music helps. In that documentary, I'm taking a lot of Polaroids of people, and the humanity really came out when I would leave cameras with them, just with hundreds of rolls of film so they could have pictures, because that's what my historical research taught me. People in refugee camps, the Vietnamese people or Japanese people in camps, like, people are still smiling. It's trying to make the best out of it. And so it's a tough question. And when I teach, I really just, it's almost flip, but I say, just be a good hang. Just really try to just sit there with people. And if you have something to give, like music, maybe that opens things up and they feel good about giving back a story of theirs. But I rarely ask. And I think that's what the music has done. A lot of times my ethnography became my concerts, where I would play songs about my family or my friends or the histories I study. And then people would, during the Q&A, tell me their stories, and that would become new songs. But it was always reciprocity, or giving first, I suppose. But yeah, that documentary makes it look a lot rosier than it was. I was literally like hallucinating layers of archives onto the walls of this room full of refugees. It was too much. And when I perform, it still remains too much, to be honest with you. And it's a very difficult concert to do. And that probably ties it up together a lot nicer than it actually is. But thank you so much for your work and your question.
And thank you so much, everyone, for being here in this last hour and a half. You've given us so many things to think about, so many jumping off points about accessing our own funds of knowledge and skills that we bring to research and connecting with people just in a human way during that process. And I really appreciate the time that you took to be here and your generosity. Let's see. So a few announcements since we are at the hour. Julian and Amelia will be visiting ASU in late January. We will have a fieldwork and workshop component on Friday, January, is it the 26th, I think, as well as the concert that you spoke of at the Care Cultural Center, which is a historic site in the Phoenix area. We will have a video stream as well. So if you're not local and you'd like to join us, we will be sending that out to those of you who are here. So thank you so much. And we appreciate your time and look forward to continued conversations.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see y'all. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Dina, can I introduce you to Dean Terasaki, who is with us here? So Dean is a photographer who has combined his art with archive. And the abbreviated story, his family was outside of the demarcation for Japanese Americans who had to be in the camps. And they had a pharmacy. And so people from the camps would send requests, could I please have aspirin or whatever, and they would send it out. So 80 years later, the owners now or recently were doing renovations, and they came upon this trove, this archive of all these letters in handwritten Japanese letters that were in the wall of these requests that came from these various internment camps.
Wow.
So Dean made a pilgrimage because he's just an incredible photographer, and he photographed the places, the locations of these incarceration camps, these war relocation centers, as the government called them. And he superimposed the handwritten letters, or the letters, onto photographs of the place. So you have, he did Amachi, Manzanar, Rohrer. And the way I came upon Dean is I saw that there was this exhibit in Phoenix of his work. And I thought, oh, I want to see that. And it was in the middle of, and then it's like, oh, today's the last day. And there happened to be an email to reach him, because Dean said, if you want, I can come in. So it was the last day. I'm like, what are the chances that he's going to answer this email in the next 2-3 hours? So he did, actually. I met him there, and he explained, and it's so much about his art and about the superimposition of history of these handwritten, of these letters to the pharmacy from the internment camps, and then his photography of place. So I was blown away. And that, that's kind of the community, because I've been working sort of in this, I've had it in my head, and then saw this, and then, so I wouldn't call him a weirdo, but he's out there. Out there doing this kind of work, and it's beautiful.
I don't want to keep everyone. I usually keep a real low profile. I'm honored to meet you, Julian. There are a couple questions that made me think about Asian American artists being kind of isolated. I grew up in Denver, and my parents were very much in touch with the community there, but my friends were all white. And there were, one other Japanese family in my entire school when I was in grade school. But your idea of stumbling to get to a place is so valuable for everyone to understand. And I think every artist understands that you sketch and you make bad art. You mess up over and over again. And so your story, Julian, about like going and singing a song that maybe wasn't so appropriate. You have to put yourself out there. You got to take those chances, and you're gonna mess up sometimes. And you learn from that, and you'll learn that maybe being quiet and people will talk because they're curious, and they're also trying to make their way.
Yeah.
So
well said.
Yeah. I will be there in January.
I look forward to meeting you in person. That'll be great. And is any of this work online? I mean, obviously not to the same scope.
So the new work hasn't made it to my website yet. Maybe I can talk one of the professors out of your email address, or they'll forward a PDF to you.
Yeah, please do. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Dean, so good to meet you. And thanks so much, Cindy, for jumping in and
Cindy,
introducing the mysterious weirdo in the on the Zoom. But thanks so much, y'all. I really appreciate it. It's nice to meet everybody here. So take care. Be good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.